We were finalizing the presentation and preparing for this, but thank you for that. Now, Andrew, next slide. I'm going to briefly go over some housekeeping rules. Everyone has been muted on entry. We ask that you please enter your questions using the Q&A pod. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording, along with a copy of the slides, will be posted on our fiscal year 2023 CSBG webinars. Today, we'll go over reporting requirements as well as things to consider as you're preparing for Module 2 and Module 4, and then we'll go over some next steps. And I will now hand it over to Verna.
Thank you, Monique, and welcome everyone to our 4th annual webinar for fiscal year 2022 annual report webinar. I was thinking earlier, did any of you go to school during the times when perfect attendance was celebrated? For those of you who may not know, perfect attendance meant that you did not miss a single day of class. And so if that applies to you and your attendance to our webinar series so far, I want you to shout your state out in the chat. I also understand that eligible entities were invited to this session. So if you're joining from a local agency, I would love to see you put your agency's name in the chat as well, as I'm always interested in knowing who is here in our virtual learning environment. Today's webinar will primarily focus on modules 2 and 4. However, I do hope and encourage you to consider what you can report on in module 3, which I know is optional. But module 3 actually gives us an opportunity to tell even more about the success and reach of CSBG as it supports goal 2, communities where people with low incomes live are healthy and offer economic opportunity. And goal 3, people with low incomes are engaged and active in building opportunities in communities. I'm not going to really go too deeply into that, but we'll rather use that as a springboard to launch into our thought for today, which says, I learned early on about the real meaning of equity and inclusion, and that when those guiding principles are not met, they can have devastating effects on individuals, families, and communities. So at the core of the purposes and goals that are mentioned in Section 672 of the CSBG legislation is equity and inclusion, especially as it relates to 676B, I believe it is, that outlines the tripartite board requirement and emphasizes the importance of hearing the voices of those impacted by low incomes and the accountability that we have to those who benefit most from CSBG. Module 3 dives into this, especially as it relates to civic engagement and community involvement. I encourage you to think about equity even as you explore how resources have been allocated, that's in module 2, as well as the characteristics of those being served and the outcomes achieved as we look at module 4. I want us to really be intentional about focusing on equity. But I'm done talking about that. But just in case the team is running behind and will not allow me to come back and talk to you at the end of today's session, I would remind you that submission of the annual report is a requirement clearly outlined in 678E, and failure to do so is a matter of compliance. And I would just say that you have colleagues on the call today who can tell you that OCS is committed to ensuring compliance through our technical assistance. And then lastly, I would give you the heads up that next week, the webinar will feature a very special guest, as our Division of Community Assistance Director, Sharice Johnson, will be on the call. So I hope you have saved January 24th, that webinar time on your calendars. So, all right, Monique, you need to rescue these people from me talking, because this is my happy place. I can talk to you all day, and I'm going to read the chat to see who's here. But Monique, I'm going to turn it over to you. And I encourage everyone, again, to actively engage in the chat, in the Q&A, and to let us know how this webinar is going. So Monique, turning it over to you.
Thanks, Verna. So today joining me is Andrew Colley and of course Verna Best. And of course we are going to allow her to have time to speak at the end. I think that everyone has appreciated her opening and closing remarks, so we want to continue with that. And just one correction, Sharice will be joining us for the January 26th webinar, which is the OLDC refresher. So next slide.
So does that mean I come back next week?
No.
I'm still not here next week. Sorry.
So reporting requirements and why we report. And again, as Verna just mentioned, next slide, section 678E A2 also speaks to requirements for the eligible entities. That includes preparing and submitting your measured performance for the state and the eligible entities in that state, including expenditures of funds, including accounting of funds spent on administrative costs, and direct delivery of local services, and the number of and characteristics of clients served. Next slide. So why do we report? This should be familiar from next week. It's a shared responsibility across the network at the federal, state, local, and national levels. While in the CSBG state plan, the states are reporting their plan for the next year. Modules 2 and 4 gives us the opportunity to show how effective the eligible entities were in providing services and achieving outcomes with the individuals and families that they served. We do want to remind you about the obligation expenditure deadlines for the majority of the states. Well, for all states, the deadline has passed. All funds need to be expended and obligated by September 30th, 2022. For the majority of CSBG eligible entities, that expend date was also September 30th, 2022. And for the small states, it's September 30th, 2023 of this year. Next. As a reminder, a complete submission includes your CSBG annual report, your CSBG CARES annual report, and your CSBG disaster supplemental annual report as applicable. As we mentioned in a previous webinar, only 4 states are required to submit the disaster supplemental annual report. Collectively, these are referred to as the CSBG annual reports, and they are all due on March 31st, 2023. The reporting requirements remain the same, and we will update that reference to the action transmittal for this year, which is action transmittal 2023-01. And as a reminder, what is a complete module 2 and 4? It's a successful upload of data for all reporting eligible entities, the submission of the state level form within Grant Solutions, and any comments clarifying your data. Comments are optional and they should be attached to the appropriate module. And again, completing your modules 2 and 4 submission. Upload your data via XMLs for all reporting CSBG eligible entities. If the eligible entity was de-designated after October 1st, 2021, you should still upload a blank XML for that agency. And then for CARES and disaster, if entity did not expend all funds or decline funds, you should also upload the blank XMLs. And then after you've uploaded the data or all the XMLs for all your reporting CSBG eligible entities, submit the state level form for each module once all CSBG eligible entities data is uploaded. And just as a reminder, if the agency has no CARES or disaster funds to expend that year, either because they returned funds, the state, you should report this in module 1, section B as some of your challenges. Also remember to update their allocation under module 1, section E. And for eligible entities, please note this information in module 2, 8.6, which Andrew will speak a little bit more about later in this webinar. And with that, I will hand it over to Andrew.
Thanks, Monique, and it's a pleasure to be here with everyone today. I'm happy to see so many names I recognize in the participants and in the chat as well. So I'm going to talk about a little of module 2, a little of module 4, and some of the things you should consider when submitting your fiscal year 2022 module 2. First thing, as always, and I think we say this probably every webinar, but your regular CSBG annual report should include CARES and disaster in all sections. We just want to point that out, as we always do. On the screen now, you can see there's just a quick explanation as to which sections will be reported on, and it's the same as last year. So with the CARES supplemental, it will only be sections A and C. Same with disaster supplemental. Regular CSBG annual will be A, B, and C, and include the CARES and disasters in all those sections. Now, as you'll notice, the regular CSBG annual report is the only one that includes section B for module 2, and that pertains to capacity building. If you did use capacity building, CARES funds or disaster funds for those, please do report that in the regular report to make sure that we capture that data. But you'll notice that section B is not being covered in the supplemental reports that are going to be submitted this year. Then, like I said before, it's the same as last year, so hopefully this isn't new to anyone. You can always refer to the DCL on the CARES and disaster supplemental reporting. As far as the eligible entity expenditure, capacity, and resource reporting, we leave it up to the states, but they can report on either the state fiscal year, the federal fiscal year, or the calendar year. We've listed all the dates there in the second row. Module 2 is completed by all of the eligible entities, and that's for regular and CARES and disaster if applicable. One thing I just wanted to point out again, regular CSBG includes section A, section B, section C. CARES and disaster supplemental, only A and C. However, please include all allocated resources, all eligible entity expenditures, and all capacity building efforts into the regular CSBG report. And then at the bottom, we still have some references that are applicable, like IM 152, and then the DCL that I pointed out before. Now, module 2, some things to consider for all the reports. We're asking you to capture how CSBG leverages all the different types of activities. And we're asking eligible entities to kind of drill down and consider if the work that you're doing might fit better in a different domain. But as we've stressed throughout this whole series, what we're trying to do is tell the most detailed and accurate story for how CSBG funds were expended and uplifted communities. So we also want to point out in section B to please report on across all programs. So volunteer hours, support by board members, partnerships for both CARES and disaster should be included in that section B. We also ask that you report all available resources that contributed to outcomes, services, and people that were served. In module 4, and we're going to talk about it later, but essentially the two should kind of complement each other. This is where you report kind of the resources that were allocated, and then in module 4 we hear about all the great things that those resources were able to accomplish. And just for further clarification, it means that these resources that were made available to the eligible entity during the year, they actually happened during that reporting period. One thing I did want to point out, and it shouldn't be any different than it was last year, but A2 should match the allocation in module 1, section E. And this amount should not include discretionary or carryover. The caveat is this is only in CARES and disaster, that part, and we've received a lot of questions, a lot of feedback about C.2. It should include discretionary and carryover. We know that that's certainly not all that has been asked of C.2. Monique has put together a great example, I think, that she's going to share in just a little bit, that illustrates kind of how you should formulate and walk through how C.2 is put together. Because I know for myself, I had a hard time understanding it, and I think the way Monique is going to be able to show it is really going to be helpful to a lot of people. Before we jump into C.2, I just wanted to touch on one thing on 8.6 of module 2, and that is the narrative opportunity of detailing how you're using funds. We ask, this is the same as it was last year, but we ask that you don't include the same information that you did last time. We're asking for a complete description of how those funds were used over a 3-year period, and asking that you don't just copy and paste, but you look at exactly what happened in totality over those 3 years. So I am going to turn it over to Monique to just really take a really deep dive into C.2, see if we can clarify everything. I had her explain it to me several times, and it was just to get her practice, so she would be able to deliver it to you guys. But I think this is really going to help. So Monique, do you want to jump back in?
Sure. Thank you, Andrew. And I also worked a lot with this with our partners at NASCAS, including Muska. So this slide should look familiar to those states who joined us on January 4th. It's almost the exact same. The intent of the information has not changed from that webinar. However, we did receive a few more questions, and the eligible entities were also invited to this webinar. So we want to go over again and make some small edits to hopefully provide additional clarity. So in this first row, we are providing what is the intent for CARES C.2. In fiscal year 2020, it was your allocation as received by the state, which is also presented in Module 1, Section E, 8.2. And then fiscal year 2021 was a carryover from the previous year, and fiscal year 2022 is also the carryover. This is for states that do not have discretionary that they allocate to the states. To the eligible entities in future years. So it's pretty simple. It's allocation, carryover, carryover. So looking at the second row, we put this formula together. Previously, instead of 8.2, it said allocation, but we did receive the question, what do we mean by allocation? So essentially, when we are referring to allocation, we're referring to the dollar amount that you provide in 8.2, or that the eligible entity provides in 8.2. In 2021, that should C.2 should be 8.2 minus fiscal year 2020 8.3K. And then in fiscal year 2022, C.2 should be 8.2 minus fiscal year 20 8.3K, as well as minus fiscal year 21 8.3K. So if we go to the next slide, there are some states that provide discretionary funding to their eligible entities. And so the only difference here is that C.2 will also include any discretionary funds that the eligible entity may have received in fiscal year 21 and in fiscal year 2022. Your state should have potentially made you aware of what your discretionary funding was via your contracts. So that is how you know what your discretionary or additional funding was. So any new dollars or any discretionary, as long as your original allocation did not change, should be added under C.2. So we are going to go over an example. I did pull some images from OLDC. So the first image is fiscal year 2020, CSBG eligible entity. This is actually coming from Module 1, Section 8.2. So this is the allocation from the state, and we are going to focus on Agency B. And so you can see when you look at 8.2 from module 2, these two dollar amounts match. So that's 428,597. And then in 2020, we did say that C.2 should match A.2. So you'll see that the dollar amount is also the same in C.2. And we just magnified that dollar amount because we do see that it's pretty tiny on the screen. So we want to make sure that was visible to you. Now going to 2021, looking at Agency B again, the state did change their allocation. So they increased that allocation to 443. And so 8.2 is now showing that dollar amount, 443,372. Now we're going to bring in 8.3K from fiscal year 2020, which the amount of expenditures was 40,161. And we're going to subtract that 40,161 from 8.2 to come up with C.2, which is 403,211. And then going to 2022, we're going to do the same thing. So, thanks, Muska. So 443,000, the dollar amount stayed the same for the allocation. So we're going to subtract 8.3K from both 2020 and 2021. And that's going to result in your new amount for C.2, which is $2,752.524. I hope I did that math right. I was moving fast. And then in a perfect world, 8.3K and C.2 would match because you've expended all your funds. Andrew, you can click one more time. You've expended all your funds at this point. So those two dollar amounts should actually match at this point. The idea is that we're showing what resources you had available to you under section C of module 2 in order to provide the services that you're reporting in module 4, section B. So that's why at the end, 8.3K and C.2 should match. Andrew, you can click one more time. There'll be a nice little arrow that comes up. That is in a perfect world. We have looked at these. And so for 2021, this might not be how it was reported. We're not asking that you go back. As you heard me discussing it, you may have heard, we're not asking that you go back and update those now. We are going to work with NASCAS to do a overall analysis and let you know if we have questions after that. But this is how 2022 should be reported with C.2 showing the full allocation. That's in 8.2, subtracting 8.3K from the prior 2 years. So I hope that helps as you guys are preparing for your 2022 submissions. And if you have any questions, please continue to reach out to OCS, your program specialist, as well as NASCAS, and we will try to help you walk through those as much as possible for this last and final submission for the majority of the states. Now going to the next slide, I did want to take a quick minute to talk about your opportunity to expand the CSBG story. So going to the next slide, that is module 3, which is our community level transformations. While module 3 is not required, we do highly encourage you to submit this. Module 3 is only submitted with your regular CSBG annual report. And we only ask that you report based on the reporting strategy that we previously provided. Again, it's optional, but we do highly encourage you. We have been reviewing these and are working on some new webinars and potentially some spotlights to discuss module 3 further. But in order to do that, we do need you to continue to submit. And with that, I'll hand it back to Andrew.
Thanks, Monique, and thank you for putting together that example. Hopefully people found that helpful. If not, I'm sure we'll hear about it and we'll put together another example. So I just want to finish things up by talking about module 4, some things to consider. So very similar to module 2 in the sense that I know I've said this and I know I've heard it a million times, but the regular CSBG annual report for module 4 should include CARES and disaster in the regular report. The supplemental for CARES and the supplemental for disaster kind of mirror what we asked for in module 2, where you were reporting on A and C. We're asking only for section B, and it's the same as last year. for the CARES and, if applicable, for disaster. And this is another chart very similar to Module 2. The eligible entities, of course, are going to be completing Module 4. The dates match Module 2, and we have dates for the state fiscal year, the federal fiscal year, and the calendar year. And as I said before, the regular Module 4 is going to include Section A, which is the Individual and Family National Performance Indicators, commonly referred to as the FNPIs. And then it will have Section B, Individual and Family Services, and Section C, All Characteristics Report. And for the CARES and the disaster supplementals, Section B only for each of those. Please remember that both of those are a subset of what is captured in the regular CSBG Module 4. A couple things to consider for all reports and supplemental reports. The information reported, we're trying to get an unduplicated count of people. So the NPIs, please ensure that column 1 includes all the people who are working towards a specific indicator. Whether or not they met the outcome is not as important as capturing the unduplicated count of people working towards that indicator. The services should hopefully tell a story and not be kind of silos of each other. The data should correlate between the two. One example to think about is if children ages 0 to 5 are being reported in the education NPI, then there should probably be some services reported for school children in the services section. Just makes sense. Sometimes people don't necessarily see the linkages and connections between those, but if you're talking about ages 0 to 5, you would think that some school children were being served with those educational NPIs. Another thing to consider is FNPI 7A, which is very confusing. I know it took me a while to get it myself, but it is an unduplicated count of people who obtained one or more outcomes from any of the domains. So if someone only obtained a job, they would be reported in the employment domain, and then they would also be counted in FNPI 7A. If that person obtained a job and they also obtained safe housing, they would be reported in the employment and the housing domain, but they would only be included once in the FNPI 7A. So essentially what we're trying to do is get an unduplicated count as best we can. So we're making sure that that person is counted under employment and under housing, but they are only being counted once under FNPI 7A. And just as a kind of a validity issue, FNPI 7A, it should be at least as high as the highest NPI recorded, which, you know, just makes sense mathematically. For Section B, this is just the regular versus supplemental because, as you recall, CARES and disaster are only going to be reporting Section B. The regular CSBG annual report, eligible entities should include information and services supported with all CSBG funds, which includes CARES and includes disaster. The CARES, we're asking you only include services and activities supported with the CARES funds, and the same goes for disaster. We ask that you only include services and activities supported from with CSBG disaster funds. I know we will have some time to jump into the questions that people have been putting in the Q&A section, but before we do that, I just wanted to show everyone the OCS contacts. We try and do this every webinar. We have your program specialists, Jessica, Ronika, Isaac, and Jamia. That handsome fellow up there is myself. In the upper right, I handle Region 3, and we have Jane, Catherine, and Jake along with myself. Our CSBG Oversight and Accountability branch has Norris, Angie, Lindsay, and Saya. And our gurus for OLDC are Monique and Nikki, and they're always willing and able to help in anything OLDC. So please reach out to them if you have any technical issues.
Before we hop into questions, just a few quick things. We do have 2 webinars next week on January 24th. Eligible entities are invited to the January 24th webinar, as it is about completing your smart form. So it's a smart form refresher. We invite everyone to attend that one, since it's been a little while since you last submitted your smart form, and we'll go over details about exporting it to an XML and preparing for all of that. And that's January 24th. To register, that link is available on our CSBG events. My colleague Nikki just added it to the chat because she's on it. And then we also have a webinar on January 26th. That webinar is for the states. It's going to show the states how to submit an OLDC. It's a refresher, so it won't have much new information, but we do encourage you to attend just as a refresher. And with that, we will go into questions. So the first few questions I'm seeing is, will this recording be emailed to all attendees, as well as will the PowerPoint slides be available? Yes, both will be available. We're working right now with our communications team to do 508 compliance, which essentially ensures that this is accessible to all, and that will be posted on our webinars link, and we will release a notice once all of the recordings are available. The PDFs are usually available the day after the webinar, and Nikki will add the link to the chat as well, so you can see where to find this PDF as well as the prior PDFs for the previous webinars in this series. And we are being asked, when can we find Word version of Module 1? That is also going through a 508 compliance review, so we should have that out no later than tomorrow. It is ready. We know that you guys need that, so we will release it shortly, as well as send you guys a quick email once it's available to you. Another question, I've seen some chat, and we do appreciate the chat about this in the chat, but the question was, when is the CSBG annual report due? And the person who asked the question said, is it due on March 31st or February 10th? So CSBG eligible entities, or CAAs, do have an earlier due date. That's because you're first submitting it to your state, and we are asking the states to review it and ask you any questions prior to submitting it to OCS. So we saw in the chat that some states have different due dates. OCS does not say when the due date is for the state. The state stipulates that due date as to when the eligible entity has to submit this data to them. But all states are required to submit the annual report to OCS by March 31st, 2023. So we hope that everyone's able to meet that date. And then our next question, and Andrew, feel free to jump in for any of these.
I was just going to point out the question. The very first one was regarding the example you used for module 2, C.2, and the person wanted to know if the logic applies to all the other data points in section C.
And yes, that's correct. So we're looking for new funding or care. So think of section C as, what resources did I use to provide the outcomes? Well, in CARES, you're only reporting on services, but what resources did I use to provide the services that I'm reporting in module 4? So it should only be carryover and discretionary for any or new funding for any of the information that you're reporting in section C. And that's actually for all the reports across, for regular and CARES and disaster. It's the resources that you use this year or in 2022 to provide the outcomes and services that you're reporting in module 4.
Right. And that example was just for module 2.
Yes, and it was only for CARES because
Yes.
CARES and disaster are slightly different from the irregular report.
And there's another question. When you say all programs, do you mean CSBG funded or those not funded with CSBG as well?
So the regular CSBG report should include everything that your agency has completed. That's why for the resources, we're asking, what are all the resources you use to provide services and serve individuals and people? For CSBG, for CARES and CSBG disaster, you should only be reporting on CSBG CARES for module B, or CSBG disaster if you're reporting disaster for module B. But the regular CSBG report, you report as normal, so you should include everything.
Gotcha. And we had another question regarding the unduplicated count. This person asks, our agency tracks all our customers no matter what funding source that supports them. We also tie outcomes to these services regardless of the funding source. We do track unduplicated families or individuals to the best of our abilities. For the purposes of the annual report, are we required to filter out any non-supported as CSBG customers?
For your regular CSBG annual report, no, you should continue reporting as you have always done and track all of your customers no matter what funding source. But for CARES and disaster, it must be filtered out for only those supported by CSBG CARES or CSBG disaster. And that's because that was one of the stipulations of the funding. So those do have to report it separately and should be focused solely on CARES, solely on disaster.
And just a question to define capacity building.
And B12 terminology capacity building is used. So this is this is specifically for CARES and disaster, I believe. So essentially one of the missions, for lack of a better term, was to, how did you potentially increase capacity using the additional funding that you received from CARES and disaster? You may say that you didn't, that you put all the funds towards the services that you were already providing, or that you were able to serve more people, or additional people achieved outcomes. So essentially, we're looking to see what you did differently with these additional funds that you maybe would not have been able to do or did not do when you solely received regular CSBG. And if I misunderstood that question at all, please let me know and I can.
No, I don't think so. And I'm trying to remember if we did define what kind of categories those would fall in one of our DCLs regarding CARES spending. I'm trying to remember what number that would be off the top of my head, but
we have our colleague Nikki here, and she'll do a quick search and see if she can add a link to the chat.
Great, thank you, Nikki. We do have one more question. There are some programs like case management, transportation, other related services that support multiple domains. Sometimes it may not look like there are employment services connected to employment outcomes. I think this is important to make this clarification in narratives when the immediate connection is not clear at first glance. Is there specific language that national reviewers like to see when describing these instances?
That's a great question and great comment. Yeah, so though we're asking you to report the CSBG expenditures, and we do look to see if you reported expenditures for a certain domain, we go to check if you also reported services and outcomes in that domain. We know that's not a direct link, and that's not an immediate connection. So when describing those instances, we're not, and what we've asked before, I was looking at some prior documentation that we released, is that you do your best estimate to really show how you've used these dollars across domains. we're not looking for a specific narrative, but how you're able to describe this is important. I do think they think that this is an important comment and that we do need to expand on it more. And so this will be part of our next webinar series. We're already thinking about some of the questions we've been receiving from these webinars and how to expand on this and continuing training and technical assistance. So right now we're not looking for specific language when we're reviewing, when you're describing these instances. We are just looking to see if you reported expenditures, that you're also reporting services and or outcomes. But we know that's not a immediate connection.
Great. And then we have another question. So does all programs include funds from ERAP, et cetera? Yes, but that only pertains to the regular CSBG report, not the CARES or the disaster. So
Well,
hopefully
except for
that's
module 2, section C. So if you did receive ERAP funds, we are still asking to include that if you received it specifically towards CARES, but Andrew's correct. Only for regulars.
right. Oh, but that would be specific to CARES itself, right?
Yes.
Okay, great. So it was still technically be CARES funds just from ERAP.
Correct.
Okay, gotcha. Well, go ahead, Monique.
Looks like there's 2 more questions.
Can you remind me where to put discretionary funding?
This question looks like it came from a state. So if you're a state reporting discretionary, you're reporting that in module 1, section E, E.7 for regular and for CARES, and I believe it's E.5 for disaster. And it is titled remainder discretionary. So if I have the number wrong for disaster, my apologies, but it is in section E. And if you are an eligible entity, those discretionary funding should be reported as part of C.2.
And one more question. Is A6 now a required response? It was not previously.
Thank you for pointing that out. No, it is not required. We are, just as with module 3, we are encouraging you to share any lessons learned, anything you want to highlight about your eligible entity, anything that you've done in the past 3 years to use these additional supplemental funds from CARES and disaster, but no, it is not required. But highly encouraged. And that looks like for now, it's our last question. If you do think of another question, please feel free to add it. We'll make sure that we get to it. If you can't think of it now, but you think of one later, feel free to reach out to your program specialist or NASCAS, and we'll answer those questions as well. And I'm going to ask Verna to come back on and close us out.
Thank you, Monique and Andrew. You all did a wonderful job. Thank you for all of the information that you shared today, as well as the examples and the answers to your questions. I appreciate you. And I hope that those who have been with us appreciate all that you shared as well. Oh, look at somebody using some emojis, some reactions. I appreciate that. So just to make sure there was a little bit of learning going on, I have 4 quick questions that I'm going to ask, and you all can answer in the chat. These are going to be easy and harmless, I promise. So this is a true and false question. I want you all to answer in the chat. True or false, some sections of the annual report will include CSBG, CSBG CARES, and disaster if applicable. True or false? Some portions of the annual report will include CSB. Okay. All right, so you all got it. Okay, I see you. Very good. Let's do another one. The submission of the annual report is optional. The submission of the annual report is optional. True or false? Okay, all right. False is the correct answer. Very glad you all were listening. True or false? Let's see if you get this one. OCS encourages you to report on module 3, although it is optional. OCS encourages you to report on Module 3, although it is optional. You all are saying true, and that's good. I am still laughing at the person that said they wish the annual report submission is optional. That was a cute comment. I appreciate it. Okay, this is the last one. This is for extra credit. You get this one right, you get extra credit. That's all I'm going to say. I'm not going to say what the extra credit is. Listen carefully. The annual report is due on May 31st. True or false? I could not even, well, I couldn't trick anybody. It is absolutely due on March the 31st. Verna doing a happy dance. You are trying to get me fired, but I'm like, yay. Okay, that's all that we have today. Thank you all so much for your attendance and your participation. We appreciate you. We look forward to seeing you all next week. And please let us know, reach out to us if you need any technical assistance on any of the things that we have discussed today. Monique, Andrew, I think that's it, unless you tell me otherwise. Okay, you are released. Thank you all again for your participation. Have a great day.